Hey, Nevin.
Howdy, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great. How about, can you hear me?
Yep, all good on my end.
Awesome. I'm curious to know before we start, um, how did you initially find out about Reserve and what got you interested in it?
Um, well, I guess so. Obviously, like my first crypto that I bought was Bitcoin, and then just as I kind of did some research around Bitcoin, then I found Ethereum, and then that kind of led me down this rabbit hole, um, which I think I came across a YouTube video about various different altcoins, and RSR was the one that kind of piqued my interest the most. Um, so this was back in 2019.
Cool. Do you remember why you were interested in it?
Um, I think just the overall vision of it. I think it was the first real crypto that I came across that was trying to genuinely um, connect. I guess you could say like Web 3 to Web 2, and then just the overall like real life use case to the benefits of using blockchain and crypto.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I was talking the other day with a friend. We were working on, thinking of clearer and clearer ways to describe Reserve, and the topic came up of which other crypto projects are trying to do the same thing as Reserve, but in some different way, like basically trying to create non-fiat money in the way that, Bitcoin is sort of, in a sense, trying to do. Um, and so we were trying to think of, okay, well, so which other projects are trying to do that, and trying to create something that's more stable than Bitcoin, but completely independent of fiat. And weirdly, back in 2017, 2018, there was a lot of talk about that. And these days, I couldn't even think of another project. And I'm sure there must be. I'm sure it must be, I have such a narrow view because I'm so focused on Reserve all the time. So I'm curious, for anyone listening, send me a DM if there's like other projects that are actually trying to do that, trying to create stable non-fiat money in crypto, because you'd sort of think that there'd be dozens of projects trying to do that, since that's kind of the original basic idea of cryptocurrency. But yeah, it's like that's kind of been the idea all along, and it sounds like you picked up on that from the start.
Yeah, that's definitely what I guess attracted me to Reserve.
Cool, cool. Well, shall we jump in?
Yeah, let's do it. So I just wanted to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this Q&A. And thank you, Nevin, for taking the time to do this. It's greatly appreciated. Um, I just wanted to quickly explain the topic of the and format of today's Twitter Spaces. So it'll be a Q&A format using questions that have been already submitted by community members. So thank you to everyone who contributed governance related questions. Um, uh, there's no guarantee all your questions will get answered, but I appreciate it nonetheless. Um, so I guess, is there anything else you'd like to say, Nevin, before we get into it?
I don't think so. Let's go ahead and jump in.
Okay, great. So just a quick note, which I think will probably be helpful for a lot of listeners. Um, there's a great presentation given by Sinatra, who's a community manager at Reserve, during Reserve's town hall, which basically is a more visual representation of the first question I'll be asking. So I thought I'd mention it as some of you may like to watch it for reference. The recording can be found at Reserve Weekly's Twitter, which is at reserve_weekly, as well as on YouTube, also at Reserve Weekly. So yeah, just thought I'd throw that in. And the governance presentation starts at the 29-minute mark. Great. Okay, so let's begin. Um, question one. So, initially, Reserve will be using a token voting governance model because a more robust alternative has not yet been found. Can you describe the voting process, and will voting be based on one vote per token or one vote per individual? And also why the team decided to implement it in such a way.
Yeah, totally. I guess I'll answer the last part first. So last year, we actually spent a bit of time starting to work on governance ideas. And we did come up with some interesting ideas, but after I don't know how many weeks of that being the main focus, thinking it through, we decided, you know what, um, all of the complexity of the protocol itself, and solving, basically answering every last question for the protocol itself, and doing all the implementation is obviously a huge task. Obviously, even bigger than we had realized at the time. And so we decided to essentially adopt what is currently the state of the art in, sort of the Ethereum community for governance, instead of inventing our new system from the start. And we reached that conclusion by analyzing the way that Compound Compound Finance does governance. They really came out with a very simple um, uh, and functional enough decentralized governance protocol before anyone else did, and it has been copied by several other projects because, even though it's simple and it does have problems, especially as things scale, it does work. And so ultimately, the decision to start with that as the default was really just a way of launching the mainnet sooner than it would be possible if we had decided to invent something completely new prior to launching. And when we analyzed the way that Compound does governance, we concluded that at least early on in the life of Reserve and R tokens, it would be fine because of certain assumptions about um, who's holding the tokens and what their incentives are. So let me talk about how this governance protocol works a little bit. Um, and you can learn more about it by just looking at the documentation on the Compound website for how their governance works, because it will be very similar. There's a few differences in terms of like the length of time delays and a few other things like that, but the basic protocol is intentionally borrowed directly, so as to not introduce any bugs or cause any further complexity of development. Um, so the way that it works is that in order to make a change to the smart contracts, and in the case of R tokens, the changes you can make are very broad. You can change almost everything about an R token through governance in its initial form when it's deployed. In order to make a change, the simple formula is one token, one vote. And so that does mean that if somebody has, 100 tokens and someone else only has one token, the person with 100 is 100 times more powerful in terms of voting. And that's nice because it doesn't require you to solve the problem of getting identity on the blockchain. It has in some sense a feature of making it so that someone who is more financially invested has more say, which you might argue makes sense. That's how corporations around the world do their governance, for example, with shareholder voting typically. But it obviously has the feature or bug, depending on your perspective, of people or organizations that have lots of tokens have lots of power. And I think that in the beginning of the life of a project like Reserve, that could be a good thing. But I do think that over the course of time, that's probably not optimal. That's probably not what we really want. And that's part of why we think that it's a good idea to change how governance works over time significantly. So, in terms of the the nitty gritty of actual token voting with R tokens at the beginning, I guess I should first say that when you deploy an R token, you get to choose which how it's governed. Basically, an R token has an owner address. That's like one of the variables of an R token, and you can set that owner address to anything. So, out of sort of off the shelf, we are providing with the basic reserve functionality, we're providing an adaptation of this compound governance system. So it's a very natural default if you're going to deploy an R token early on to use that, but you don't have to. You could set the owner address to just like your personal Ethereum address, and then just be the dictator of that R token. You could hook it up to some other DAO system that has already been coded. There are many different experimental DAO systems on Ethereum, or you could invent something completely new, and that's part of the idea. We actually, when I say we are going to work on governance, I really actually mean something more distributed than just the core team working on it in private. It's really intended to be um, something that's worked out in the broader reserve community. We'll be contributing our part, and we'll be doing that in public so that everybody knows all of our ideas, good and bad, and can take part in that. But it's also, blockchain governance when it comes to these decentralized apps that run on platforms like Ethereum. It's like an ecosystem wide problem, right? It's not just reserve that needs better governance than the state of the art right now. It's really almost every single application that requires governance on Ethereum or even other blockchains like Ethereum really needs better governance. And so I do think that it could be that the core ideas that lead to the eventual main system that our tokens choose to use could even come from totally outside of the reserve community. It's just that we're highly committed to it, and we happen to have some people who I think are pretty good at thinking about it. So I actually do think that the reserve community, in its current form and as we grow, may end up leading the blockchain ecosystem in decentralized governance. But that may not be true. It could be that somebody else does. Anyway, getting back to the top level point there, I was just saying that you can set the governance mechanism to anything you want by just determining that owner address. But by default, we're proposing using compound governance at the beginning. So what that means is it's slightly different from how it works in Compound, because with Compound, any comp token holders get to vote on any proposal. The voters just are the comp token holders. But in the case of R tokens, they are intentionally meant to be sort of their own separate kingdoms. So each R token is instead governed by the staked RSR holders for that R token, as opposed to all RSR holders. And we think that makes sense because the RSR holders who have chosen to stake on a particular R token are the ones who do have skin in the game for that R token. If you haven't staked on an R token, then you have no exposure to it, positive or negative. And so we think it makes sense for the staked RSR holders to be the ones who vote. And so when you stake RSR on an R token, something that's really neat about that is that staked token position is itself a token, right? So you stake on an R token, your RSR is deposited into a staking smart contract, and then in that same transaction, you are basically sent the appropriate number of these staked RSR tokens. And you can transfer that balance. So you could send that balance to a friend, you could trade it on a DEX, you could even deposit that balance in other DeFi apps and use it as collateral. You can do anything that you can do with an ERC20 token. But one cool thing you can do with it is vote. So the way that this token voting works is it's just based on the number of tokens you have of staked RSR for that R token. So that might mean that for example, the reserve project, like the core team manages an overall treasury for the project that includes, as everybody on this call probably knows, the slow wallet that has tons of RSR still in it. And so if you just think of voting in terms of who has the RSR, we would have an outsized amount. But if we stake in a pattern where we have a much smaller portion of the staked RSR on any given R token, we can actually intentionally limit our own governance influence if we choose to. And we do intend to do that. So we do intend to stake a meaningful amount and play a meaningful role in governance, but we intend to intentionally limit ourselves to not having a majority or especially like a supermajority of staked tokens on any given R token. And that makes it so that when it comes time to make a decision, we have a voice. It's a significant voice, but it's not a dominating voice. Even though there's that large number of RSR that's still in the project treasury. So that's kind of the basics. As you mentioned, Sinatra gave a pretty good overview of the mechanics of the process itself, including the different stages where something gets proposed and then voted on, and there's certain delays, and so on and so forth. So if anyone wants to understand the nitty-gritty details, I would check out that recording of the town hall and Sinatra's presentation on governance. It was great. And then again, you can also read the compound finance documentation to get a sense of the system that we're taking from.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah, quite a bit to unpack there. I assume Reserve is maybe planning some more documentation surrounding this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, by the time it launches, it really needs to be fully documented. Um, so it will be.
Great. Okay. Um, yeah, that was really insightful, actually. So I'll move on to the second question. So how does this initial governance model that you just described, how does it discourage large token holders and including team members from, I guess, gaming the voting system? And I'll use a quick example that there was a recent Ethereum naming service proposal to remove Director Brantley Milligan, and it saw 1.2 million votes for and 1.4 million votes against. And Milligan himself contributed over 300,000 votes to remain as director, which obviously had a decisive impact on the results in his favor. So, are there specific mechanisms in place to prevent this?
Well, in a sense, no, but there is a mechanism that I think is interesting there. But let me comment on that overall situation first. So, um, I do think that you know in that instance, like Milligan having a large vote, I don't know the details of ENS politics right now, and I don't know why people wanted to remove him. I don't know if there was some sort of scandal or something, but I think that in general, people who are super invested, who are deeply familiar with a project like this at the beginning, those people having a significant amount of power, not enough to, like in that case, not enough to determine the vote all on their own, but enough to determine the vote, with enough support from others. I do think that that can be a good thing. So, without knowing any of the details of that particular case, um, I would not start off by assuming that it was a bad thing that the vote turned out that way. Um, that being said, obviously that's not always true. You can easily have somebody who ends up with a lot of tokens at the beginning and is actually, a negative force in governance and a negative force on the culture, say. Um, so there is one mechanism that allows individuals who have tokens to voluntarily sort of divide up their power if they choose to. And I think this is, most likely to apply to tokens that are held by the Reserve project at the beginning, but it could be that individual large holders choose to do this as well. And that's basically delegation. So you actually have to in this voting system that Compound uses, you have to delegate your votes to somebody before you can vote. And that means, you can delegate to yourself and cast the entire vote of that weight entirely yourself. You can also choose to delegate your votes to any number of other Ethereum addresses. So for like the project RSR, it would be easy to delegate to, many different community members, for example, such that, the project tokens, we could sort of intentionally say, okay, we want people who are aligned, who are deeply involved to have this voting power, but we actually don't necessarily want it or want all of it ourselves. And so you can choose to do that delegation. Now, the thing is, you can take that back, but only under certain circumstances. So if you delegate your votes to somebody and then a proposal is made, like a proposal is opened for voting, once that proposal is opened, essentially a snapshot has happened such that you cannot take that voting power away. So you have irrevocably given up your voting power for that particular proposal. Um, that being said, you can always undo a delegation action, and then that does apply to all future proposals that get made. So it's an interesting sort of balance where, the project tokens, for instance, they could be delegated, and then if a proposal is made, that's irrevocable. So you can tell as soon as that proposal is made who's going to be able to vote. I mean, maybe you won't know people's names, but you'll see Ethereum addresses at least. You can tell that the project, won't have a large vote, but you do have to keep in mind that whoever it is that controls those tokens could redelegate in the future and delegate back to themselves or take power away from any particular delegate. Um, so, so that's something where, like, if uh, Brantley had delegated his votes through that system, and then that proposal was raised, say suddenly, where all of a sudden, there's just a live proposal of, him being removed as a director, then whoever it was that he delegated to, if they actually thought that that was a good idea, they could have voted, for that rather than against that. I'm not actually sure what it means to be a director in ENS, but yeah, so that's one mechanism that can go part way to limiting that power. But in the long term, I think that I personally believe that when it comes to getting governance right, a lot of the decisions that need to be made are nuanced technical decisions. Technical not necessarily in the sense of code, but technical in the sense of economics and mechanism design in the case of reserve, and sometimes technical in the case of code as well. You just have to make sure you're not voting for a change that's going to add a piece of code that has a bug in it. Um, and so, I think that those decisions can be very hard to make. And I think that it's really important to find ways to select people or perhaps organizations that really are in a position to know, that are in a position to figure out the truth about what the consequences will be for any given governance proposal, and then also ensure that those people or groups are really aligned with the best interest of the whole. And this is obviously a very difficult thing, right? Like, this is what we attempt to do in the modern world with democracy, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And blockchain governance is just a subcategory of governance in general, and it has a lot of the same problems. So I think that the simple mechanism of one token, one vote, it's not a bad approximation at the start, because the people who have a lot of tokens at the start of a project like this usually are pretty sophisticated and pretty aligned. But that can drift over the course of time as the token ownership drifts. And so that's sort of the core of why I think it's really important to figure out, a more sophisticated mechanism than one token, one vote, so that you don't end up with, people who are kind of disaligned barons, kind of determining what happens.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. Obviously like it's not a perfect system, so we'll see how it evolves. And hopefully, before it gets out of hand, Reserve will have figured out a more robust way to govern the protocol.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, okay. So moving on to question three. I think this is probably on a lot of people's minds, so I'm happy to ask it to you. Will the launch of mainnet give RSR holders the right to also govern the unlocking and use of tokens from the slow wallet? And if not, will that come at a later date, or is that never going to be a right?
Um, so the launch of mainnet will not bring that about. The core team will retain a bunch of discretion in how those tokens are deployed. Um, and interestingly, with the way that things are now, with them being in the slow wallet and the core team having that authority, um, there's kind of a one-way street. There's like a one-way street in the direction of um, in the direction of making irrevocable decisions, and sort of committing to how that release and deployment of those tokens should be. And when I say one way street, I just mean like we could put those tokens into a smart contract that's governed by RSR holders or by some other DAO in some way. But then you can't really undo that. So, for better or for worse, it could be that our attitude about these kinds of things is like a little bit overly obsessive. But, as you probably picked up, um, our team is like just very careful about trying to get every major decision like this right, when it comes to the protocol or governance or, in this case, treasury management for the overall project. And so we're still thinking about that. We're still thinking about like, well, what is the best way to do that? And or perhaps I should say, like, we're thinking a little bit about that. We're mostly thinking about other things that are more urgent right now and more important to get right with the launch of the protocol itself. But it is something that's on our minds. And I think different people on the team probably have slightly different opinions about it. We've had some discussions about it. I have some thoughts about it too. And I actually, it's this weird thing where my natural impulse would be to just share my thoughts. But I've had this experience in the past where if I just share my raw thoughts on something, people might come to think that that's actually the plan or that's actually what's going to happen. But it's really not to that stage yet. So um, I'm sorry for the non-answer, but basically, there isn't like a clear no of like no, that's never going to happen. There isn't a clear yes of like yes, that's going to happen right at mainnet. It's more like, well, we do have the power to do that, and we see advantages and disadvantages to doing that, and so we're gonna work to find our best answer to how that control should be given away over time. And hopefully by the point of mainnet launch, or perhaps a little while after that, we'll be able to set a more clear trajectory so that people's expectations are set. But for now, there isn't a definitive plan in place.
Okay, yeah. I think obviously, like you alluded to, it's a pretty complex subject, and this is subjective what I'm going to say, but I think that I have no reason to kind of believe that the reserve team have bad intentions with it, and I think that should be like people should think about that whether they have trust in the team or not, because I think that could maybe ease their minds if they truly trust the people involved that they'll do the right thing. But obviously, being in crypto and blockchain, like everybody kind of thinks that decentralization is the best way to go, but it always brings in problems as well. So I think everything needs to be really well thought out before implemented.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And, you know, I'm completely aware of the fact that, most people on the internet, including most people in the reserve community who aren't super involved, they really don't have enough information about me and the team to make a clear judgment about whether they ought to trust us with this sort of power. Um, and that's uncomfortable for me. I don't want, I don't like people having to rely on me and my judgment and my character and so on, any more than is necessary. It would actually be preferable for me personally to not be in that position. But then at the same time, as you just said, it's like, well, but there are a bunch of trade-offs, right? Like if you just sort of go the sort of like as decentralized as possible immediately because that's what crypto culture says, well, we've seen that go awry. And I think it's very possible to end up being very wasteful with resources, if you go that direction. And I would add that, like my personal motivations and the motivations of the people on the team, are pretty complex. Like we've had these interesting ideas about what could happen with the future of money in the entire world based on what we're doing. And we are looking for ways to bootstrap the project to make that possible. And obviously, we are economically incentivized ourselves. But if you compare that to an RSR holder who, mostly just wants the price of RSR to go up, or wants to, earn staking rewards in the short term with their RSR, there's a way in which our perspective is useful to be integrated when thinking about, how to deploy project resources and how to optimize for these interesting long-term outcomes. And so I think we could reach a point where there's some sort of DAO structure that actually really contains that nuance, and is able to, sort of guide the usage of RSR over the course of time in the right direction. But I think that for now, yeah, one main benefit that we get by having the core team have that discretion, is sort of being able to really take into account this very long-term, um, ideas and ideals, when it comes to how to use those resources.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's definitely a complex topic for sure. Um, so moving on, let me see. All right. So you've kind of alluded to this um, in the first question, but I'll just read it because I think maybe having it separate might clarify some things. Will each R token that gets deployed demand its own governance model, or will R tokens adopt core governance components built in by Reserve?
Right. So yeah. So I can say a little bit more about this. So if you use the reserve factory contracts to make an R token, and a factory contract is basically a smart contract that, when you call it, can deploy other smart contracts. If you use that setup to deploy an R token, which is what we're, aiming to support, then there are certain variables. I actually don't know the full number of them at this point. I think that as we develop, we add some and remove some, so the number is fluctuating a little bit as we write the code. But there's a certain number of variables that basically determine how the R token works. And, um, there's even a bunch of variables where, there's just like, the R token system consists of several different smart contracts. So, for example, there's like, a contract for RSR staking. And you could actually change, the pointer to point to a new contract with entirely different functionality if you wanted to, as a group of governors. Um, so basically, when you deploy the R token, those, those variables are preset, But even those can change because the variables have to do with certain contracts. So if you were to replace a contract with another one that works a completely different way, you could also then update the set of variables that governors determine. So the whole thing is like quite flexible at the beginning. Um, and that includes, this owner address as one of the variables. So, like we said before, you can determine, which governance system to use at the initial point of deployment, and you can also determine it through governance later on. So you could deploy and set the owner to your own address, and then after a month, you could just independently execute a change as the owner, where you pass on governance to a DAO contract. Um, and likewise, the R tokens that get deployed early on, which we expect people will probably use this default token voting system, those token voters could vote to replace themselves, to replace the governance mechanism with a new mechanism that's totally different. And that's an important moment, right? Like if you're gonna, that's kind of like changing the constitution of a country, where you better get it right. And also, there might be a lot of resistance to that kind of change, because it's like, well, do we really want to give up our power? We have power now. Do we want to just hand off power to some other mechanism? And depending what that mechanism is, people may be skeptical and reticent to do that. So that's the interesting dynamic in terms of the game theory, though, is that you can also just deploy a new R token that's a copy of an existing one in terms of how it currently works, but has a different governance system. So let's say that there's an R token that's gotten some traction. It uses this token voting system. Somebody comes along with like a cool governance mechanism that there's a lot of support for. A lot of people are excited about it, but the current governors aren't willing to vote for a switch. Well, you could just deploy a new one that has the exact same basket and settings and so on. It wouldn't have as much usage because it would be starting from scratch, but it would have that new governance system. And if R token users preferred to use an R token that had that other form of governance because it made them feel safer, or they thought that it would evolve faster, or whatever, then it could actually just win out, even if the governors of the prior R token never opened up to the idea of change. And that's part of the point of making it so easy to deploy new R tokens, is to make it so that um, it's almost like having a legal regime in a country that encourages entrepreneurship and startups. We're trying to set up the conditions to encourage experimentation and innovation. And so the idea there, the fundamental idea is, it's really an evolutionary process, right? It's allowing for mutation, and it's allowing for I guess the difference is obviously the mutations are intelligent, not random. So it's allowing for intelligent mutation and exploration, but then it's really putting R tokens in competition with one another. Because an R token has to compete for users with other R tokens, and with all of the currencies in the world for that matter. And it also has to compete for RSR stakers, if its users want insurance and good governance. Um, so really the idea there is to make it so that it's easy to A, pass off governance to a new system if you want to, and B, create exact copies or new R tokens that are slightly different with those different governing systems. And so I think that depending on how big this all gets, that could end up being like an extremely exciting, fascinating process, where we might end up seeing two or three or four or five major different governance systems that work in notably different ways playing out in parallel. And we'll get to see the pros and cons of different systems. They can copy each other's features, and learn lessons from each other's mistakes. So yeah, that's kind of the vision there.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, um, yeah. So basically, I mean, the R token creator or creators can choose, um, I guess, to adopt the plug and play option, and then, but also if they want, they can create their entirely individual governance mechanisms. But that's interesting what you said because I haven't really thought about that. Nothing's really set in stone. So even if there was an R token deployed that gave the founders complete governance power, they could still eventually decide to maybe, you know, push it out towards like a DAO, that and give up power. That's really interesting.
Yeah, totally. Um, and let's see, there's something else I wanted to add there. Um, well, your thought just now was interesting enough to maybe forget the thing I wanted to add, but it'll probably come up.
Okay, my apologies.
That's okay. That's okay.
Um, okay, so um, I guess so. Okay, next question. Other than R token backing, what are some key decisions you see RSR holders needing to make in both the short and long term? And you previously mentioned that maybe code updates might be one.
Yeah. Yeah, this actually reminds me of what I wanted to mention. So, um, to start off, an R token is very mutable. Like, almost everything about it can be changed through governance. And so, as I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of different individual, like, kind of nitpicky variables. Like, one example is like, what is the unstaking delay for RSR stakers? Where if you stake your RSR, and then you choose to unstake, you can't do that immediately. I mean, unless the variable is set to allow you to do it immediately. But we added a delay to the mechanism, and the governors can set that delay. And the reason for that is, um, the staked RSR acts as an insurance pool. So if there's a default, you need it to be that that pool of capital is going to stay there for a while to be drawn on, because from an individual incentive perspective, you would want to unstake and not allow, like, basically not follow through with paying out for that insurance claim, if you will, to use a metaphor. Um, so you can imagine the unstaking delay being, 2 weeks, or 30 days, where if people start to worry about a collateral asset being, being a problem, you need it to be that RSR holders can't unstake. So that's just one variable of the, again, I forget or I don't know actually the exact number. Someone on the protocol development team could rattle that off, but I think it's around 20 or so different variables, different numbers that have to be set, or addresses or whatever, that end up determining the details of how an R token is functioning. Um, and with the point about code updates, as I mentioned before, some of the variables that are set are addresses, which refer to other smart contracts. So there's kind of these components of the system, and let me see if I can give one example here. Um, okay, let's say that governance changes the basket that's backing an R token. So they take out, token A and they add token B. Well, somehow the token A has to be traded out for token B, and the default trading mechanism that we are baking into the protocol at the beginning is batch auctions, in particular using the Gnosis auction framework. So that means that all of the capital that's in token A will be put up for auction in this structured way via Gnosis auction, and anyone can bid in those auctions. And then you bid by offering a certain amount of token B for token A. And let's say an auction lasts 24 hours. Then by the end of that 24 hours, whoever has put in the best bids ends up filling that auction, and the protocol now has token B in exchange for token A. But that is just one possible way to trade these ERC20 tokens on Ethereum. It could also be possible to do a trade through AMMs like Uniswap. And the reason why we didn't do that initially, the reason why we chose batch auctions, is because of MEV. If anyone is sort of deep in this world, you'll understand MEV. Where basically, I'll keep it short and just say, if a smart contract is trading with an automated market maker, they're subject to miners actually essentially front running them and making those trades less efficient. So we ended up concluding that batch auctions would be the best deal economically for an R token at the beginning. But the reason I'm going into this example is that there's lots of innovation in on-chain trading. And so let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that someone comes up with an MEV resistant automated market maker, which basically would mean that you could do trades with sort of on-chain liquidity pools and not worry about this front running issue, even if you're a smart contract that doesn't have a lot of information about the world. Well, the trading module for an R token could be updated to add this new MEV resistant AMM as a trading option, even though when the R token was deployed, maybe that didn't even exist yet. So that's an example of a complicated thing to change, where the trading module would need to be updated. Probably definitely new code would need to be written and audited and deployed. And the governors would have the authority to accept a code change to the trading module that would make that possible. And like one pattern we've talked about, while we're on the subject, one pattern we've talked about there is you could set it up so that an auction is opened, but then right at the end of the auction window, the protocol could check and see, well, what price would I get if I traded on, this automated market maker right now, like literally in this block? Is it better than the price I'm going to get by clearing this auction with the bids that have been made? If so, take it and trade with the automated market maker instead. If not, then take the price that bidders in the auction offered. So it's a way to just sort of purely improve the result through taking into account other possible trading venues. It's a little bit like 1inch that's like a DEX router that will sort of automatically trade on the DEX that's going to give you the best price. That's something we can also do with the protocol. So that's an example of a kind of code change that I expect to happen because I expect on-chain liquidity and trading to evolve. And so we made sure to build it in such a way where the governors would be able to make changes so that the R tokens could always be getting the best prices that are sort of possible to get, given sort of how DeFi and online trading works.
Okay. Yeah, definitely slightly a little bit out of my knowledge, but like the realm of my knowledge, but
Yeah, it gets pretty
if
complicated pretty fast.
yeah, I definitely obviously like the easy to understand bits. I mean that makes complete sense why why they would be voting on that and how you guys built the mechanism for it. So I think that's really interesting.
One actually, let me jump in and add one more thought. So one more thing that I think is interesting here is I've said a couple times on this call that everything is mutable, and that's actually kind of scary if you think about it. Like, you actually don't necessarily want the governors to be able to change everything, or at least to be able to easily change everything. And so another pattern that I expect and that I encourage is over the course of time, over the course of the years, as things get worked out, I think it's probably healthy for these governance systems to give up certain powers to change certain things, or at least further restrict their abilities to change certain things. So you could imagine a governance system that, even though there's an owner address that can change all these things about an R token, the governance smart contract can limit all the ways in which it itself can call can basically call different functions to change these variables, even though it is just the dictatorial owner from the perspective of the R token. So what I mean by that is, like, let's say that I don't know, like let's say that like let's use a metaphor to try to make this simpler. Like um, let's say you have like two companies that have a contract with each other, and company A says, anything you tell us, we will do. You can tell us anything about how to spend our money, who to hire, who to fire, etc. We'll just do it. And company B could then have an internal set of rules where it's like, okay, we have added an irrevocable governance rule to how we deal with company A, where we're never going to reduce the amount of employees that company A has by more than 5% per month or per year. Um, and so even though from company A's perspective, they're like, no, you could reduce them 100% in a moment if you wanted to. Company B could have this internal structure that limits itself from exercising that power. And the same thing can happen here. So even though an R token is sort of fully changeable, the DAO contract that's hooked up to an R token can limit the ways in which it changes. It can limit the speed in which it changes. It could make it, it could require much more consensus or supermajority or something for highly consequential actions. And it could even fully give up the ability to make certain kinds of changes. Now that gets complicated because if you can vote to pass on the owner address to another system, well then you can always pass on ownership to another system, which is back to being able to make all changes. So if you really want to lock it down, you actually have to give up the power to make that change. And there ends up being a bunch of dependencies like that you have to think through. But I just wanted to say that I think that it can be healthy, and I think probably will happen in some cases, for these things to actually become sort of more and more ossified and less governable. Where again, you always have the escape hatch of making a new R token that can sort of compete and try to overtake something that has become ossified in a bad way. But I think some ossification is good because it leads to predictability and reliability, which, if you're thinking on the scale of billions or maybe trillions of U.S. dollars worth of value, in like the extreme success case, that might be really important. If you're like a central bank or a huge endowment capital allocator or something, you're not going to be cool with sort of like the crazy world of DeFi governance. You want something that's like very understandable and predictable. So that's a pattern that I expect in this evolutionary governance process over time.
Very interesting. Okay. So like, I guess a quick example could let's say there's three founders of an R token, right? And I guess the majority of the RSR stakers decide to, I guess, relinquish power for a certain aspect of decision making, right? Like maybe it's, I don't know, too complex or whatnot. Um, and if two founders of that R token agree, I guess, in a way, they could influence that vote, right? But then if that other founder doesn't agree, he could basically just create his own R token, and everybody, all the RSR stakers that disagree, can move over to that and adopt that new governance. Is that
Yeah,
is that kind of right?
totally.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's kind of like capitalism with no non-compete agreements being allowed, right? Like, if you imagine that, like, anybody at any company could just leave and start a new competing version, and there's no such thing as a non-compete to stop them from doing that, then you sort of have the sort of full form of capitalism where startups can always be created, and if they do a better job than an existing big company, then they can end up taking over the market because customers, actually prefer whatever it is that they have to offer. This is really the same thing for currency. It's trying to make it so that anyone can try to do a better job, and if people are really excited about that new way of doing things, they can just switch. The switching costs are actually pretty low, and so similarly to how, the fact that startups exist probably causes established companies to do a better job in many cases because they have to worry about being disrupted. So they have to try to keep up and continue innovating and so on and so forth. I think that this exerts a similar pressure on our tokens if they, hopefully some become big and successful. If that happens, the governors will worry about like, well, if we don't if we close ourselves off to innovation or these different processes, then someone else could always go, create whatever this thing is that's being talked about. And if it gets really popular, then maybe that would take over the market. The thing is, you can also just let them try and then copy if it's working, right? So if someone makes a new R token with a new system and it starts to gain in popularity, maybe an incumbent would decide, okay, looks like they're going to take over the market if we don't add that feature or add that way of doing things or whatever. Maybe it's take away that feature that people didn't like or something. And so then they could respond to that information by making that change. So yeah, it's kind of this cross between like evolutionary, evolution and capitalism in a sense is sort of the way that this is meant to work.
Okay, and would so say this does end up happening where a popular art token, is kind of like decision is made, and then some people don't like it, and they go over and make basically an identical one with different governance models. How would the I guess like regular users of that art token, how would they be affected? Would they have to kind of switch over to this new one, and how would they be notified?
Well, I mean, they wouldn't directly have to do anything. It's like the fact that some new art token comes to exist. If they're satisfied with the current reality, they can just stay. Um, but if they, let's say that you're allocating a huge amount of capital and you really care about the details, you might check in periodically with, well, which R tokens have been invented, in the past few months or the past year, which are growing. Are there other versions that I should consider that might be better or different? And so, yeah, I mean, the network effects and growth dynamics and so on, they're obviously very complicated, hard for anybody to really fully understand because it's like a kind of complicated system. But yeah, I mean, it's essentially just you can sort of use that startup product analogy of like, well, how do people find out about new products? How do they decide to switch? Well, sometimes it's word of mouth. Sometimes they've been advertised to. Um, sometimes there's like a scandal with a product that they use. For example, lots of people switching from WhatsApp to Signal a while back. That's kind of because there was a particular problem that people got upset about. And then there ended up being a little bit of an online movement where a lot of people kind of copied each other and made the switch altogether. So there could be something like that where maybe there's a controversy and it's like, well, half the people who use this R token are really upset about this thing. They really wanted this change to be made and it didn't get made. And so then maybe that's a moment in time where you could rally a lot of attention and willingness to switch to a new thing if you would deploy a new version that doesn't have that problem. So I think that there's all sorts of different ways that could play out. And I would say if you have one more closing question, let's go ahead and do that. I have another call right now that I'm going to have to jump on in a minute or two. Um, but I want to give you the opportunity to ask a closing question if you had one.
Yeah, so it actually, I'll kind of tie it into this last question. So if like using that example that we just spoke about, because because it's a voting token voting system, it doesn't necessarily mean that majority agrees, right? You could have 100 people with one token, but then have one person with 1,000 tokens, and if he votes on it, then majority, like he has majority of tokens. Um, so then that could be like a reason that somebody creates another R token, and all those people, the majority of people that only had one R token, could move over and govern that token. But that obviously like you know allows for it to happen again and other problems. So kind of transitioning into this last question, how long post mainnet, if you even have an idea, would Reserve ideally like to incorporate a more robust governance model? And has there been any breakthroughs on that front?
It's a great question, and we really don't know. As far as how quickly would we like to do it, well, we would like to do it as soon as possible. But this is kind of an open research question, and with open research questions like this, you never really know how long they're going to take to figure out. So I'm going to take the approach, the team's going to take the approach of, searching for the best people in the world to work on this problem and try to convince them to come hang out in the reserve community and work on it. And there's some people already that are in the pipeline for that. But I don't know how long it's going to take. And there's really a wide variety of possible outcomes given that it's a research problem. I mean, sometimes you do research for a year and you're like, damn, this was harder than we thought. We still don't have a good answer. That can even happen for several years. So it's really open-ended. And we're going to be coming at it with a significant degree of urgency because it's also really important. But it's going to be really hard to tell the timing. So it's really going to be an effort of like, okay, let's put a lot of energy toward this. Let's spread a lot of knowledge. Let's do this in public so that everyone can see our thoughts. Anyone who is able to think about this topic precisely, I hope will end up, reading and hearing about the thoughts that are happening in the reserve community and come start to interact with us over it. And we'll have to see. We'll have to see how quickly that plays out.
Okay, yeah, definitely makes sense. It's very complex, right? So because there's obviously very smart people trying to figure it out, and they still haven't. So
Yep.
it could take some time, but um, well, yeah. I mean, I wish we could speak forever because it's definitely a complex subject. But I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I think we gained a lot of insight into the governance aspect of the protocol, which is nice, especially since we're kind of approaching mainnet. And then, yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Nevin. I really appreciated it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. These were awesome questions. Thanks for organizing this. Really enjoyed it. And it looks like you've been recording, so I assume that it'll be shared in the community. I'll happily point people to this recording if they have some of these questions about governance in the near future.
Great, yeah, and thank you everyone for joining this Q&A. Really, hopefully you found it useful, and like Nevin mentioned, it is recorded, so feel free to revisit it anytime you need it. Thanks, Nevin.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Talk to you later.
Bye.